Hello budding crocheters, lesson number 2. Today we're going to do the first crochet stitch that you'll need to learn beyond the chain stitch, and it's called in the US single crochet and in the UK double crochet. Now I'm going to put a link in the video description to a conversion chart. It's quite confusing having to learn two different terms, which is why learning to read crochet charts is useful, reading pattern charts instead of reading written patterns, because the symbols for crochet are always the same between the UK and the US. So look up crochet symbols and learn them, and if you see a pattern that has a symbol chart as well as the written pattern, then you can always compare just to make sure you're doing the right stitch. But for the purposes of these tutorials, I'm going to stick with US crochet terms because they're most widely used, I guess. And they kind of make more sense to me. So the first one is single crochet. Now I've done a chain. You learned to do a chain in the last episode, and this is 6 chains. Remember, you count the V's. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You don't count the one on the hook. This is the first one. So there's 6 chains there. And I'm going to do 5 single crochet stitches, but the reason I've done 6 chains is because when you're crocheting in rows, you use turning chains. So turning chains are what you do when you get to the end of one row and you turn the work to start the next row. And they help ensure that your stitches start at the right height and that your edges remain nice and straight. So each stitch, like single crochet, double crochet, half double, triple, so on, they all have an associated chain height. Single crochet has a chain height of 1, so this one extra chain on the end is going to be our turning chain for single crochet. So we're going to start in the second chain from the hook, and we're going to do 5 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I bring this up here, single crochet is this chain here. Just go through the top loop of the chain, and then you put your yarn over, turn the hook, pull it back through that loop, so now you've got 2 loops on the hook, and then you yarn over again and pull it through those 2. Now that's single crochet. If I do it again, put the hook through the next chain loop, yarn over, turn the hook and pull it through that loop there. So now there are 2 loops on the hook, and then yarn over again and pull it through those 2. That's single crochet. So this is our turning chain, the squiffy one on the end there. And then this is the first one, that's the second one. So I'm going to do 3 more to get to the end, and then we'll talk about the anatomy, yay, of the single crochet stitch. So next one, this top loop here, push the hook through, yarn over, this is pulling up a loop, remember you learned that term from the last lesson. Turn the hook and pull it through, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over again and pull through both. 2 left, 1, 2, so through this top loop, yarn over, pull up that loop, yarn over again, pull through both. And then the last one here, this is going to be quite loose because it's where you started your slip knot. So I'll show you. You put the hook through, and this can happen. See, it pulls the tail through and makes a big loop there. And don't worry, yarn over, pull up the loop, and then finish your stitch, yarn over and pull through those 2. And then you'll see this big hideous gap there, spoiling your lovely perfect work. So just grab a hold of the tail, in one hand take the knot between your thumb and finger and just slide it up. And you can slide it up pretty tight there, it's not going to spoil this last stitch. So this isn't secured, it can still pull loose, but it's a bit tighter when you pull it up to the end like that. So now we have the turning chain and 5 single crochet stitches. Now if I pull the hook out, turn this work so that you're looking top down. You remember the chain stitches are composed of V's. Well, the top of every crochet stitch is the same. One stitch is a V. Doesn't matter what stitch you're working. Double crochet, triple crochet, they'll all end at the top of the row in a V shape. So you can count the V's to see how many stitches you have. Remember, you don't count this one that will be on the hook. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the last stitch at the end there, and the turning chain. So if you turn this the other way around, you should be able to see our 6 chains. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just turn it over again, there's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Turning chain is always a bit difficult to see when you're doing single crochet because it's just one chain. Now when you're crocheting a stitch, if I undo this last stitch so I can show you, so this is the top of the last stitch we worked, and this is the working loop on the hook. If I can get this back on, there we go. So you crochet a stitch, just wiggle this through there. It's a bit tight now since I pulled it through. Oops, I've done that wrong. Don't yarn over. And now this was our working loop from the previous, after finishing the previous stitch. This is the one we've just made. We yarn over and pull through both. Now this is the new stitch we've made, so that the last stitch you worked is always behind the hook. If I pull this tight again, and oops, there's a little bit of the stitch left on there. Sometimes the yarn splits. There we go. Okay. So some patterns will call for you to insert the hook into a particular stitch. This is going to be quite confusing when you're first starting out with crochet and you're not familiar with how the stitches work, what the anatomy of the stitch is, where the stitches are, and so on. So we know now that each of these V shapes is a stitch. And if you look at it from this side, from the front, so this is always the front is always the side facing you, whether you're working this direction or whether you've turned and you're working this direction. If you're working this direction, this will be the front. But you can see they look different. When you finish your work, the front will be the neat end, the neat edge, and the back, you can see it looks different. Mine is quite neat because I've been crocheting for a while now and my stitches are getting neater and neater. But when you're first starting, if your back looks just absolutely crazy and a royal mess, don't worry about it, it's normal, it's fine, you'll get better. So this is the front, and you'll see the posts here. These are called the posts. Those vertical lines, there's two there. Each single crochet stitch is two posts. So in pairs you'll see 1 stitch, 2 stitch, 3 stitch, 4 stitch, and the last one is quite difficult to see against the turning chain, but there's another one there. So that's the anatomy of your stitch. So if the pattern calls you to work in the previous stitch, you'll know it's the one just before your hook there. And you should be able to clearly see 5 stitches, and you can slip your hook between each one. Well, this hook is a bit thick, but there's one. Then the next one is after those 2 posts, and so on. So now we're going to talk about turning your work. If you're going to be working a scarf or a block of fabric using a stitch, then you'll be working back and forth in rows. So we've got to the end of this row here, and we're going to turn. So you'll need a turning chain. Now we know that we're working single crochet, and as I've said, the turning chain height for a single crochet stitch is 1. So we're going to chain 1, and this does not count as your stitch count, so we're still going to work 5 single crochet. Now you can count them, you turn your work around. It doesn't matter whether you turn this way, that's the way I go, or whether you turn that way, as long as you stay consistent and turn the same way every time. So turning this way, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what we work through are the V's, the same as the chain. So we push the hook through those top 2 V's. Now it should be quite easy if your tension is loose to push the hook through. If you're having trouble getting the hook through, it's probably, most usually when you're starting out, is because you're putting the hook in the wrong place. So you can see that gap there. I'm crocheting with chunky yarn and a big hook, so you can see all the holes. Oops, close this one up. That gap, that little hole there between my thumbnails, is where you want to insert the hook. So it passes under both of these V's. So we push the hook through, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through both loops. Exactly the same as we did the first round, and the turning chain is bulging out a little bit because we've got the stitches facing up this way. When we get to the end, it'll be straighter. So let's do the next 4. Same place, you're putting the hook underneath the V through both top 2 stitches, like that. Yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over again, and pull through those 2. So that's 2, let's do the next 3. 1. Sorry, that tinkling there is the lens cap hitting against my watch. Let's see if I can move that out of the way. 2. And the last one, 3. So remember, we're not counting the turning chain. Some patterns do, most of them don't. The turning chain is just to keep the edges nice and straight. So we've got from our front end 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the next 5 we worked this way around. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You've got your turning chain on the end here. It's a little bit bulgy, but that's fine. So you can see that this edge is straight, and this edge, apart from this turning chain, the bottom one is always a little bit wonky, but otherwise it's straight. When you're starting out, if you have straight edges, you're doing awesome. If you don't have straight edges, you're doing like everybody else did, and that's perfectly fine. You'll get there. So I'm going to do another row just to make sure. So turning chain again, because we've come to the end of the row and we're going to turn the work. So just chain 1 and then turn. So this chain now gives us the height necessary to work the single crochet stitch straight across. So we go through the V there. This is the first one. Actually, I'll show you the first one. When you do your turning chain, remember this one doesn't count. The one on your hook doesn't count. If I pull that out. So this is your turning chain. That's not where you work. You're going to work into this one. Skip the turning chain, work into this one. And if you like, you can just count from the end there. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the one you work in. And the more you crochet, the clearer this will become. So we do 1, and 2, 3, 4, and the last one can sometimes be difficult. Just make sure on the last one that you are going through both of these, because it's next to the turning chain. It's usually a bit awkward. You may need to turn the work just to make sure you're going through both of those. There you go. So now we've got 3 rows of 5 single crochet. Move that out of the way. So this is our tail end where we started, and you can see the pattern starting to form there of the row. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can see the edges, because of our turning chains, are nice and neat and straight. So now we're going to talk about finishing off. Let me just grab the scissors. So make sure you leave a decent enough length of tail. Usually 6 inches is good, that you can sew in. And up here you'll see if we pull this, it'll go straight through. So what we're going to do is, actually I'll show you what else too. If I cut this first, again leave a decent enough length that you're comfortable sewing it through. This is the last stitch we worked, and this would be the working loop that would be still on the hook. Now if you pull this through like this, it's fine, but it's still a little bit loose. It can still come through. So what we do instead, if I put this back on the loop and do this stitch again, oh come on, it's through there. Just working the last stitch again so I can show you. And so instead of pulling it through this time, you're going to pull this end of the working yarn is a bit short for me to grab hold of, through that loop, and then pull it up and pull this tight. So the same way we finished the chain when we were doing the chain, you just pull the yarn through the loop and then pull it tight. So now you've got these two tail ends here. It doesn't matter whether you finish off on the same side as the tail or on the other side. It's fine whichever way. So let me grab my darning needle and show you how to neatly weave in your end. So we'll start with the tail end. This is a darning needle. It's got a nice round tip there and a wide end for working with wool. Let me just take this up here to thread it. And you can suck on the top of the wool if you like, because we're going to cut that bit off anyway, so you won't have your spit left over in the work. So this is our tail. Hey cat. What we're going to do is, tail was on the left hand side when we were working, so this is the front of this row. We're going to turn it around to the back of the row, and all these loops you can see, we're just going to pull this through them. So I'll go through there. It doesn't matter which ones you go through, it's better to work in an up and down fashion. So I'm going to go up through that one, down through this one. Just make sure that you're not poking through to the front of your fabric, so you can't see the needle there. Down through that one, next stitch over. So the camera's going crazy with me moving this forward and back. Up through that one, down through that one. Split the stitch there. Try not to split the stitch, just makes it neater if you don't. Up through that one, and so on. And what you should do is go up and down in one direction for a few stitches, and then go back on yourself for a couple of stitches. So just work backwards. Camera's struggling with focus again. And always try and end, there, that's better, downwards, so that the thread is facing towards the bottom of your work. And then snip this, and don't cut it flush, give it a little bit, like up to maybe 1/4 of an inch of tail. So what we're going to do then is just pull on the work to make sure that we didn't pull the string, and this little tail should recede into the work a little bit as you stretch it out. So that's your tail end gone, and this edge is still nice and neat. Now we're going to do the other end. So let me just thread this. So we finished off working across this way, so this is the front for that row. We're going to turn it to the back. And what you can also do is, every stitch will have loops in the back, these posts that you can see. If this focuses again there, these. So I'm going to just put the needle through these loops if I can get it in. Actually, this one is quite clear. Let's go in this one first. And all of these loops you can see from the previous stitches. I'm just going to go underneath all of them. You don't have to do this in one go, you can do them a few at a time. Come on camera, let's move these out of the way, see if that'll help. There you go. So I've gone underneath all of these posts at the back. I'm just going to pull through. Now hold your work here. Pull it through, but make sure you don't pull it so tight that it deforms the work. So we've gone through in a straight line through all of those. That's not very secure, so now what we're going to do is do the zigzaggy up and down bit for the last few. So I'm going to go working backwards up through this one, down through the next one, and then underneath this post and the next post. Just just to get into the next stitch across, and then go up and down one more time. Up through that one, down through that one, stretch it out, and then give it a snip, not too close to the end. Just pull it out a little. There you go. So this is the front of your fabric, and you can't see any tails at all, any loose yarn. You can't see where you've worked in the yarn behind the fabric. It's all just nice neat stitches, and the back doesn't look too bad. If you want, after you've finished your project and you've pulled it all, made sure it's all nice and in shape, you can cut these flush. Depends what you're making. Sometimes this is going to be inside your work and you're never going to see it anyway, so you can leave it there. And working it in that zigzag pattern should make sure it holds up to being washed. You'll always be washing your crochet on a wool cycle anyway, just because of the type of fabric you're using. So it'll always be a gentle wash, so it's not going to get too pulled around. If you're making something that you think is going to have a lot of wear and tear, you can leave longer tails and then just weave them back and forth across further stitches, and you can even go down into the previous rows. Just make sure you're working through the back loops so that it doesn't show up on the front. So that's how you do single crochet stitch, turning chains and working back and forth. So if you check the video description after finishing the tutorial, I'll try and put some links in there for projects you can try now that you know how to chain and how to single crochet. You know the two basic crochet stitches, and hopefully you tried some of the projects in the video description from the first video. I put some things in there, really simple things, nothing too complex, but it should give you a taste of the kind of stuff you can make with crochet, even just knowing the simple chain stitch. But now you've got this stitch as well. Now what I did when I was starting to crochet is I just practiced making straight lines. Like, you could do this, but make a longer turning chain, long enough to wrap around your wrist, and then just do a few rows of single crochet, and you've got a nice thick wrist cuff if you want to make it like this thick. And then you can put a button on the end or a clasp of some kind. In the next one I'll show you how to do a button loop. It's really straightforward. So you can just stitch a button onto the front, and then on the next end as it comes around, when you're still working on it, you can crochet a chain loop for your buttonhole. So then you can make a little wrist cuff or a bracelet. So there endeth lesson 2, and I'll do the next one in the next few days, where I'll be teaching you American term double crochet and a few more tricks that you'll need, just taking your crochet knowledge forward a little step. So happy crocheting, and I'll see you next time. Bye!